Look, I don't want to be negative. I'm going to be quite negative, so I apologise up front. And I want to say that there's a lot the government's done that's extremely good, especially from the Treasury, and I know all ministers are working as hard as they can. But I'm personally really concerned that people are losing faith in government's use of data and science, and because it's such an important debate, I want to focus on that. So I'm going to park a lot of the good stuff, and I'm not ignoring it. Firstly, scientists are becoming increasingly sceptical of the use of lockdowns. So Edinburgh's Professor Woolhouse says that lockdowns are a strategy that is visibly failing. Oxford's Carl Hennigan, and thank God for him, says lockdowns push peaks into the future, just requiring more lockdowns. And I think anyone who thinks we're all coming out of lockdown on 2nd of December is just living in a parallel universe. One can dream about it, but frankly, the reality is slight. Sunita Gupta, lockdowns are a blunt policy that forces the poorest and most vulnerable people to bear the brunt of coronavirus. And everybody making decisions over coronavirus is in a well-paid job with a cushy pension. And one cannot say that about so many people who are suffering. The WHO says that lockdowns are a last resort. And in fact, Hennigan and Tom Jefferson, so disturbed are they by the use of government stats that they have said of the predictions, projections and illustrations, when you look back at government using these figures, the use of data they say is quotes unquote abysmal. Now, I'd love to know from the Minister why she thinks you have senior independent scientists being quite so caustic about the government's use of facts. Now, one of those reasons, as far as I can see, is Professor Ferguson and Imperial College. And I'll be careful what I say, because they're professionals and they're worthy of respect. But Professor Ferguson, for 20 years, has a history of predicting mass death from almost every public health emergency. Now, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to quote myself, but I will quote a bunch of other people. And the reason I'm doing so is because I think it's very strongly in the public interest that the government, as a matter of urgency, conducts a peer review into the evidence that it has been receiving. So Johan Gisek, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, Sweden's former chief epidemiologist, said Ferguson's model was not very good. Academia, that's fighting talk. The Washington Post quoted him as saying that his forecasts were, quotes, almost hysterical. Lund University applied Ferguson's models and found a massive difference between Ferguson's predictions and what actually happened. Professor Angus Dalgleish said they were lurid predictions. Viscount Ridley has criticised Ferguson's modellings. Thrushfield, Professor Michael Thrushfield from Edinburgh University, Ferguson's modelling on foot and mouth was, quotes, unquote, severely flawed. John Ioannidis from Stanford University said there were, quotes, major assumptions and estimates that are built in the calculations which seem to be substantially inflated. Or he did say that Imperial seemed to be a professional team. Other experts I've spoken to say Imperial's work is almost always an extreme outlier to normal forecasts. And yet it does seem, because of the risk-averse nature of government, which I understand, that that it is taking outliers as almost the norm, which they categorically are not. And if you look at Ferguson's predictions, 150,000 deaths from foot and mouth, or between 50 and 50,000, 150 million worldwide from birth flu when 282 died, 65,000 British deaths from swine flu when 457 died. I mean, I know that mitigations take place afterwards, but I really think that the government needs to look into this, some of the advice that it's getting, because I think it is highly dangerous. And when you have people, members of SAGE yesterday, arguing for a total shutdown, including schools, you really wonder if government is losing the plot over this, because we are obsessing about the risks of COVID and almost parking. Or, yes, I'd love to.
I'm very grateful to. I had an excellent meeting earlier, which knows about. And one thing I would say, which he explained to me, is that if schools are left open, that adds 0.3 to 0.4 to R. So I think one of the things the government should consider is if we're going for this lockdown for a month, it's a pretty big compromise to leave schools open. And so I think the government needs to explain why their strategy of this lockdown is consistent with leaving schools open, much as I applaud the fact they'll be there.
I thank my little friend for the intervention and for giving me a bit of extra time. I'm most grateful. So, I would love to know from the Minister, where is any sense of balance? And I speak personally as well. I know the member for Strangford lost somebody recently. In the last decade, both my parents died of winter respiratory flu, and it was really upsetting for me. 3 years ago, 22,000 people died of winter flu. According to the logic of some people in this House, we effectively have to shut down our lives for 6 months of the year in case people die. I just think this is a bizarrely dangerous precedent that we're going down, that government now believes that it can effectively halt death. Once upon a time, when my dad got to sort of 85, mid-80s, 86, once upon a time you went to somebody's funeral when they hit 85 or over and you talked of a life well led. They now die of COVID, several years above the national average. Politicians are now saying it's the greatest disaster facing humanity and must never happen again. I really understand the virulent nature of COVID, and I understand the impact on the NHS, although I did rather think the NHS was there to protect us and not the other way around. And I think we need to get some semblance of balance. And if the government was using statistics honestly and openly and transparently, and on the balance of things came down on the side of lockdown, that's fine. But lockdown is a dubious tool. And the way that we are presenting that data, I think, is putting it in terms of hazard in the way that it is approaching this subject. Thank you.
Thank you.